Welcome back, guys. Hope you're all doing great. It's Vetri here. So in the previous video, we discussed about the React hooks and custom hooks and all those concepts we discussed briefly with simple examples for the beginners to understand. And we also integrated them in an advanced way to how to enhance that code. So if you haven't watched those codes, so I dropped the link so you can go ahead and watch that code, or click the top right corner, click that link, you can watch that video. Well, basically in this video, we're going to learn the React testing. So we're going to understand what is testing and why we need testing, right? So we're going to understand it in a beginner friendly way. So testing is the most important stuff you need to know, right? So even if you know how to code in React, you need to understand how to test all those components, whether it is working properly or not, right? It's important to understand how the testing works. Okay. So without wasting your time, let's get started. So what is testing in React? Testing means verifying that your UI and logics works as expected, even like right before the user breaks it completely, right? So in simple words, you simulate the user behavior and you check the expected output and you prevent the future bugs, right? That's the testing job. So why the testing is most important, right? So most of the beginners used to ask, like, why should I test if my app is already work? Because that's a common question for everyone, right? The real reason is code changes break the existing features, right? So there's a chance that code whenever you're making some changes on your code, like if you're implementing a certain stuff, that might can break with the previous code which you already written and which is already successfully running, right? So the code changes breaks the existing features. There might be a chances out there. Then bugs, a lot of bugs, right? So bugs can reach the production, so we don't want that bugs needs to be reached the production. Refactoring becomes scary. So think about it. You created a bunch of components. If you are trying to refactor their names, it gets complicated stuff. Then and most common issue with when you're working with the team, your team doesn't trust your code. That's where the testing takes places. Okay. So if you run the test, like you build a component and you run the test all by yourself, it gives you the confidence, it gives you the safer refactoring and faster debugging, and it gives you the interview advantage for your next promotion as well. As that's for our self improvements. Okay. uh, so when it comes to testing, we need to talk about the types of testings as well as. So that's a very important concept. One is the unit testing, testing the small piece of logic. Example, functions, reducers, custom hooks. So it doesn't include no browser interactions or no DOM interactions, something like that. Then the second one is the component testing. That's the most important for the React. Testing how a component renders and behaves. For example, button clicks, then form inputs, conditional rendering. This is where the React testing library shines. Then the third one is the integration testing. This is the testing how multiple components work together. For example, form submit and triggering the API calls together. Then the parent and child component interactions, all these things. Then the fourth one, E2E, which means end-to-end testing. Testing your entire app flow, login, dashboard, logout, something like that. User gets to login page, move to the dashboard page, then get out of the dashboard page, right? So for this kinds of stuff, we use the tools like Cypress, Playwright. So don't worry about this. Like we don't want to deep dive into all these stuff and all those things, but I just want you guys to know about it, right? So like in this case, we're gonna work on the Vitest, because since we are using Vite, we're gonna use the Vitest library to understand how the Vitest will work and all those stuffs together, right? So one thing in the testing psychology philosophy, you need to understand that you should test its behavior, not the implementation. Implementation can be different from code to code by the different person's approach, but at the end the behavior should be the same. So that's why we should test the test behavior, not the implementation. Meaning you should not test the internal state, you should not test the class names. Test what the user sees in the screens. test what the user does when the user on the user screen. That's what we have to do. All right. So let's start writing the code now. So this is the place we might have a lot of questions as a beginner, right? So we write, let's understand that we finished writing the test. So where actually I run it, where I actually place the test file, and what are the naming conventions that I need to use for the test file. So all these steps that we are going to learn step by step, where to place the test file and how the test runner works and how to run the test in React and what happens in the behind the scenes. So all these stuffs that we're gonna understand everything one by one. So for that we need to install a certain packages. So the first packages which is going to be, let me open the Google, and here I'm just going to search for the package called Vitest. This is the package that we are going to use, Vitest package. So let's go ahead and install those things. pnpm add Vitest. That's the package. Then of course we need the JS DOM. So don't worry, I will explain why we need all these packages and everything. So we need the JS DOM and testing library. We need the testing library of the React. Then we need the testing library of Jest DOM. These two. Okay, Jest DOM. Okay, JS DOM and Jest -DOM. Jest DOM. These are the like the packages that we have to install, right? So then hit the enter. This will add all those necessary packages in our code. Let's wait until it's successfully installed. Yes, here we go. So let me clear it now, and I'm just going to close all these stuffs, clean it completely. And here now we have this vite.config.js. Let's open that vite.config.js file. Let's open it. So this is the place where we have already defined the plugins. So this is the place where we need to define the testing environment setups over here. So we have this command called test. Open the object. For the test, we need to set the environment. We're going to use the environment for JS DOM. This is the environment, JS DOM. Okay. So JS DOM, like we are not going to test the code in our normal browser, Google Chrome, or not like that. We are going to use the JS DOM, which creates a virtual browser and simulates those component in that browser and trigger those code and make sure all the components and everything, the test which we written, works perfectly. That's the reason we need. So that's why we need to set up the environment first. So we need to set up the environment, okay, environment, which is going to be the JS DOM. Okay, so don't make any spelling mistakes. That's really important. This needs to be without any spelling mistakes. So JS DOM. Then we need to set the globals, not global, globals. It needs to be true. Then right after here we need to set the setup files. Okay, so setup files, basically that's the initial setup file to trigger the Vitest, which imports all the Vitest libraries in it. So basically the setup files, it's going to be coming from your /src folder. Then we have the test folder, and inside that we do have this setup.js, which we don't have yet. So let's go here, source, let's create the test folder in it. Then inside the test folder, I'm going to create a new file called setup.js. So please make sure the location which we returned over here inside the source test setup.js, inside the source test setup.js. Perfect. This is the settings that we have to update in our read config.js. Then what I need to do is we have to get into the setup.js and we need to import the package. So import at testing library just DOM. This is the package that needs to be imported. Okay. Then one more thing, you have to get into your package.json and you need to make sure we have this test command over here. So we have to import that. Okay, so inside the scripts, all I have to say over here called test, then I'm gonna bring the Vitest. That's the command. Then we can simply run the pnpm run test. That's going to trigger it. Now what we have to do is, how can we check the test and all those stuffs? So the most important stuff you need to understand when it comes to creating the file is the naming conventions, right? That's the most important stuff. So the component, the test file also needs to be exactly in the same location of your component, and the file name, it needs to be finished with .test.js or .test.jsx, something like that, right? So let's go ahead and create those stuffs, and let's make sure it's working properly. So for that, we need to create the code, right? All right. So for that, first let's create a simple counter example. So I'm going to create inside the components, I'm going to have myself a new file called counter.jsx. Okay. And here I'm just going to RAFCE, which is going to be the counter itself. And inside this counter, basically we're going to have ourselves a use state snippet, which is going to be the count, and set count by initial, it's going to be 0. And inside this division, basically we're going to have a paragraph tag where we are going to display the count state, which is going to display the text like this. Then I'm going to have a button, which is the type of button itself, and this is the button where we are going to have the increment, like increment. And whenever I'm clicking this, on click, this is going to get the set count, and we're gonna access the previous value. With the previous value, we're gonna increment the value with the 1. So that's the click function which we returned over there, right? This is how we returned it. Now we need to make sure that it's working properly, right? So normally this count, how does this work? So once you click it, it's going to increment the value and it's going to display the value as 1, right? So now we need to write the testing code for this. So let's go ahead and write the testing code. So for writing the testing code, what you have to do is, you have to create the test file in the same location. Okay, so for that, I'm gonna create a file inside the components folder itself called counter. Keep the same name, .test.jsx. Okay, counter.test.jsx. Perfect. Now here we need to import the certain libraries, which is going to be import from at testing library of not just DOM, it needs to be React, from the React. Here I need to get the render function, then I need to get the screen, then I need to get the fire event. Okay, so each of the functions has a certain responsibilities, right? So there's a render, which helps you to render the counter component, and the screen, which that's the place where we are displaying it, right? So the screen, the place where we are going to render it. Then fire event, that's the component which helps us to trigger an event. Okay, so let's bring the counter component as well as, so let me enable the word wrap so you can see it completely. Perfect. And let me bring the counter component as well as, so import okay, it's automatically imported. Let's see, test, let's bring the test function, test increment count when the button clicks. Button is clicked. Okay, that's the string we are giving for it. Then we have to have a callback function, open it. That's a testing name what we are trying to do. Then inside this callback function only, we need to render the component first, open it and render it. We are going to bring the counter component from where ./counter. Make sure the counter is being imported. Then next we need to find that increment button like the user does, and we need to trigger it. So I'm going to bring the fire event dot, we're going to trigger the click event, and we are going to access the screen. From the screen I need to find that button. So screen dot get by text, we're going to fetch that button by using the text. So here you need to supply the exact same text what you have used. So I'm going to give that, or you can get it by an ID itself also. In this case, I'm going to go with the text itself. Then it will trigger it. Then I need to verify the output. So that's the place where we're going to use the expect screen dot get by text. Okay. How the output is going to be print, count space colon space 1. So let me copy this. So expects that this is the output, this is the place it's going to print the output as 1, because once the button is being clicked, it's going to print the output as 1. So here I'm just going to say to be in the document. So it needs to be in the document, something like this. Okay, that's the expected output that needs to be in the document. So save these changes. Okay, so I hope this is how it looks. So otherwise what I can do is, let me expand this one so you can, I think the browser is not necessary, so let me make it clear now. All right, this is the code, which is perfect. Now this is the text where we are simply checking the behavior, rendering the component, finding the text like the user does in the screen. Then we are triggering an event, click event on that button. Then we are expecting the output. This is the output that needs to be in that specific document, right? This is the code that may really make sense, right? So we already have the counter component, the counter.test.jsx in the same locations. Now we need to run the test, right? So let me open it and npm run test. Hit it. It is going to trigger the Vitest, and it is going to find out the component counter.test, which is loaded, and it's triggering the increment count when the button is being clicked. That text, that particular test is being triggered, and it's giving us message as 1 as a pass, because counter is loaded, test files is being loaded, counter component is being loaded, and the event is being fired, and the output is also being verified, which means everything is working perfectly. The test is really good, and our component is working as it's supposed to be. All right, so this is all about this test. So I hope you understand the beginner stuff, like how they are writing the test and how they are accessing it and how they are putting into it. So if you have any questions in this, just let me know in the comment sections. And now let me take it to this next level. So we have this the app.jsx, where it is, here it is, right? This is the stuff. So this is the place where we are having the debones stuff and everything, right? So in the app component, we are using the API calls, and we are using a very custom hook for use fetch, which is we are simply supplying the URL and it's returning the data. So this is the API and call that we need to verify whether it is working fine or not. So we need to write the test for this. So we have this use fetch hook over here, right? So this is the place where I need to create the test file. So I'm just going to create the test file over here, which should be the exact same pattern, use fetch, right? Use fetch dot test dot js. All right, inside here, so what we have to do is basically we need to create a mock data, right? So we need to fetch the mock globally, right? Then we need to make sure that testing everything is working fine. So don't worry, I will explain it completely. Okay, so first I'm gonna say import those things from at testing library of the react. From the react, what we are going to do, I'm going to fetch the render hook. Then I'm going to make sure this is for wait for. This time we are not going to use to render a component, and we are not going to use the same functions what we discussed previously, because that's not the quite same, because this is the API call and this is a custom hook that needs to be verified by the time when it's being used, right? So here I'm going to bring the import from dot slash use fetch, and I'm going to get the use fetch. Okay, then here I'm going to make sure that to mock the fetch globally. Okay, so here I'm going to bring the before each, this function. This is a callback function to be executed before each test. This function receives the text context parameter, like, so we need to, every time whenever being that any test file is being triggered, this needs to be run. That's the reason we are using this before each function. Okay, this is going to get the callback arrow function. Okay, it's going to get an arrow function in it. Okay, inside this arrow function, I'm going to use this global keyword, global dot fetch function. Use this fetch function is equals to. Okay, so here we're going to use this Vitest, v that needs to be imported from the Vitest, v dot function, call the function, and it's going to have an arrow function in it. Open it. I think we don't need to open it. That's fine. Then here, this is going to handle the promise, and that promise needs to be resolved properly. Okay. And this inside this resolved, I'm going to get the JSON data. Okay. JSON, open it. And that is going to return an arrow function. And that is also going to resolve it's going to return a promise. Okay, the reason why we are using promise.resolve, get the JSON, and then again on my callback function promise.data, this is the place where we are going to resolve and receive the array of data is, if you get into the fetch function, you can see first then function, it is going to receive the JSON data. Then the next then function, that's also promise, it is going to receive the data, and we are assigning that to our data state, right? This is what happening exactly over here. Receive the JSON data, then receive the data array over here. Okay, perfectly. Inside this, we're going to mock the data samples over here like this. ID1 title post, ID2 title, something like this. So save this. This is how really it looks. Perfect. Now after each, we're going to use this one more function called after each. Right, this is the callback function to be executed right after each of the every test. That's the duty of this function. So I'm gonna bring the callback and bring the v dot, and here I'm just going to restore all mocks. We're going to use this function. Okay, this function will restore all the mock functions, everything. Okay, this is the thing. Then right after here, we're gonna write the test now. So don't worry about this. We are going to, so don't import this. Okay, it's not necessary to be imported. Then right after here, I'm gonna say fetches data and returns it. Okay, that's what it's going to do. Then it's going to call the async function. It is going to be an arrow function. Open it. So here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to render that hook first. So I'm going to get that result. How we are getting the result? We are getting the result as the data itself. Okay, so const, let's get the result. Const results equals to render the hook. We have to render that hook, and that hook is going to have an arrow function. Open it, and inside here I'm going to call that use fetch hook. Then I'm going to trigger that API. Copy and paste that API over here. Save it. This is how it looks. Then we need to understand initially it needs to be null, the expected output. So expect the result dot current value. Expect the result dot current value to be the null value. Okay, expect the result dot current value to be the null value. Then we need to wait for the state that needs to be get updated. Okay, we need to wait for the state that needs to get updated. So await, wait for open it, then have a callback function, open it, then expect result dot current dot to equal, that needs to be equal to this. If that is being triggered, this is what the expected output that needs to be. That's the mock which we created. So that's the thing it needs to be. Then we need to make sure that it's verified properly. So right after this is the place where it's been finished. Right after here, verify the fetch was called correctly. We need to make sure that. So expect, then we need to call the fetch function dot, we need to have been called with. We have a function called, whether the function is fetch function is being called or not, we need to make sure that. So that's why we are using this to have been called with. So if it is called with this particular fetch function, then it is working fine.